The story goes something like this. One day there was a knock at the front door. The servant of the house went to answer the door, and there stood a messenger of the king. Now this king was a new king. He was a war hero, loved by his people, and he had recently deposed the old king in what had turned into a long and bitter war. That old king had been the grandfather of the man who had lived in the house. And now, after all these years, the new king had finally found him, finally tracked down the last living heir. How his stomach must have churned with fear. Fear for himself and for his young son. Both of them carried the formerly royal blood, and now they were going to be arrested, executed. It just didn't seem fair. In fact, it wasn't fair. Life hadn't ever been fair for him. It had started out great. His father had been a royal prince, his grandfather the king. Royalty had its privileges. He had even been given a royal name, Mirab-Baal, which meant something like the opponent of the false gods of our enemies. It was a name heavy with expectation, as if he were destined for greatness. That name was only a distant memory now. The little boy who had been called Mirab-Baal was just 5 years old that day, when a soldier, bloody and exhausted from battle, ran into the palace gates and yelled out, "The king and his sons are dead!" The same cold chill that he now felt ran through his body. All of a sudden, the palace was a place of panic. People weeping with fear. Mirab-Baal remembered how his nurse came running up to him, having gathered as much as she could carry in her arms. She told him to run. Run for your life. So he ran, as hard and as fast as he could, but his little 5-year-old legs could only run so fast. In desperation, his nurse picked him up, and with Mirab-Baal in her arms, she ran, but something caused her to lose hold of the boy, and he flew out of her arms, and in the fall, became a cripple. And so it was on the day that his father died, most of his family lost, Mirab-Baal's life was changed forever. His nurse took him to an obscure town a long way from the capital, and his name was changed. No longer would he be called the opponent of God's enemies. Now he would be called the son of shame. He had to live the rest of his life without his father, and with a severe disability. So severe that whenever he is mentioned in history, his disability is always mentioned as well. He lived there in hiding, because being part of the defeated royal family meant that he was also an enemy of the state. He would have been a potential rival for the kingship, the sort of person that the old king's supporters would have rallied around in opposition to the new king. And so, for many years, he lived there in secrecy, being cared for by others. But now, on this day, there was a surprise at the door. King David wants to see Mephibosheth. Hi, folks. This is a little bit of a different Sunday service for you today. Just to catch you up, if you didn't see the announcement that we had to make it right before our normal 10 a.m. service on Sunday, which is today, we had a power outage. Now the lights came back on, but the phone lines didn't. And so as we were scrambling to set things back up and make sure everything was going well, we realized we were unable to stream a live service. So we hit the record button on our computer system and hope for the best. Well, unfortunately, in the scramble to set things back up, we have no audio of that service. We have the video, we have the picture, but there's no sound. No sound of the music or of communion or prayer or sermon or anything. So without any other option, it's about noon on Sunday afternoon, and I'm sitting here and I'm recording for you the sermon, and we're going to take communion together, and I would love to share that moment with you, those of you who can't be here with us in person. I want to make sure that we're all staying connected and that we're all taking care of each other, and I think that'll become pretty clear. So if you need to, go ahead and pause the video, go grab supplies for communion, and we're going to do that at the very end. Thanks. So today we're going to continue in our series called Fresh Fruit. We're looking at character traits that identify us as followers of Christ. What is the evidence in our lives that we are Christian? And the how of it. How do we show it? The why of it. Why do we put them into practice in our lives? What's the point? Last week, Mike took us into the story of Habakkuk, and he encouraged us to choose joy in our circumstances. And you can find that sermon, that whole service, if you go in our YouTube channel to the playlists. You can go to Sunday services, and you find them in order with the date stamp on it. Mike mentioned that Habakkuk wasn't exactly the kind of name that you give your kid today. Just because I was interested, I checked the United States Social Security Administration's records on baby names, and they go all the way back to 1880. But they only publish data if there are at least 5 babies born with a certain name in any given year, for privacy reasons. So you might have guessed, there have not been 5 Habakkuk's in any of the 140 years that we've been keeping track. But even more unlikely a name is Mephibosheth, right? The son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, the first king of Israel. They had made a promise to each other, David and Jonathan, back when they were young, that they would always look out for each other, that they would always care for each other's families. And now that David was king, he intended to keep that promise. Today we're going to talk about kindness. Now, I'm not going to sit here and try to define the word for you, right? You know what kindness is. I'm not going to talk about how to be kind. I'm going to talk about why. What's the point? What's our motivation for showing kindness to people? And I want to put the big point up front here today at the beginning of the sermon so you can see it play out. Kindness is at its best when it cannot be repaid. Kindness is at its best when it cannot be repaid. That's not what most popular stories will teach you. Movies, TV, fairy tales, that sort of story. They'll teach you that you should show kindness to the oppressed and the downtrodden because one day that person might be in a position to show kindness to you. Right? Our culture is full of fables about kindness being repaid in unlikely ways. It's a feel-good story. But that's not the way God operates. That's karma. The idea that what goes around comes around. But that's an inherently anti-Christian idea. The idea that you get what you deserve is fundamentally flawed. Because if we're being honest, most of us, we know exactly what we deserve. And we pray we don't get it. Now, Mephibosheth, he had done nothing for King David. Jonathan was long dead, as was anyone in that family who had ever done anything to benefit David. Mephibosheth had, in fact, lived the last 20 years wishing that David would never know he was alive. He was hidden. He was ashamed of his heritage, literally the son of shame. And yet, David was a man after God's own heart. He longed to do what was right in the eyes of God, so this is what he did. He called a servant, a messenger named Ziba, and he asked him to find someone from Jonathan's family. This is recorded in 2 Samuel 9 if you want to follow along. The king then asked him, "Is anyone still alive from Saul's family? If so, I want to show God's kindness to them." Ziba replied, "Yes, one of Jonathan's sons is still alive. He is crippled in both feet." "Where is he?" the king asked. "In Lodabar," Ziba told him, "at the home of Machir, son of Amiel." So David sent for him and brought him from Machir's home. His name was Mephibosheth. He was Jonathan's son and Saul's grandson. And when he came to David, he bowed low to the ground in deep respect. David said, "Greetings, Mephibosheth." And Mephibosheth replied, "I am your servant." "Don't be afraid," David said. "I intend to show you kindness because of my promise to your father. I will give you all the property that once belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will eat with me here at the king's table." Before I came here to CCH, even before my first church, I used to work waiting tables at a restaurant. I enjoyed the work. I liked taking care of people. It helped me pay for college and start a family when I served at a little country church that couldn't afford to support a full-time preacher. For the most part, it was run by good people. One thing I'll never forget was the manager explaining how the employee benefits, the discount, worked. She said that after our shift was over, we could order a meal for ourselves at a pretty steep discount. But additionally, if we wanted to come in on our day off, we could also have a lesser discount for ourselves and our family. And the question was immediately asked, who counts as family? And she just waved her hand, smiled and said, I assume anyone you want to sit down and share a meal with is family. That's a very biblical attitude. Anyone you want to sit down and share a meal with is family. That's what David was offering. That's the one thing that Mephibosheth never had. Family. Far more than he could ever repay, just because he wanted to be kind. That's our example today. David showed this kindness to Mephibosheth for no other reason than to be kind. Kindness for kindness' sake. We also have the example of Jesus teaching. And Jesus had a habit of getting into your perspective on the world and saying something that at the same moment you knew to be true, but that would turn your entire world upside down. He just had a way of speaking into people's lives in a way that changed them. And he would say things that were true, but that he knew would be perceived as radical. Now, in Jesus' day, this concept of eating meals together as a sign of friendship and family and kindness, it has been twisted and corrupted. The rich would throw these elaborate dinner parties and invite all of their rich peers, and they would show off how elaborate of a dinner they could afford. And guests would jockey for special seating and positions of honor so that they could be seen. But there was also an expectation that the guests would reciprocate. If you were invited to a dinner party, then you better be having a dinner party soon and invite those who had invited you. It became this social ladder. It became an exercise in being seen, of gaining honor. It was this massive, stressful, complicated act. And all thought of kindness had been taken out of the picture. So that's where Jesus finds himself in Luke 14. He's been invited to dinner at the house of a, quote, leader of the Pharisees. This was highest society stuff. And Jesus looks around at everyone around him trying to claim their seats of honor at the head of the table. And he gives them some advice. Here's what he says, Luke chapter 14. When you are invited to a wedding feast, don't sit in the seat of honor. What if someone who is more distinguished than you has been invited? Well, the host will come and say, give this person your seat, and then you will be embarrassed, and you will have to take whatever seat is left at the foot of the table. Instead, take the lowest place at the foot of the table. When your host sees you, he will come and say, friend, we have a better place for you, and then you will be honored in front of all the other guests. Now, so far, this is pretty practical stuff. He's just giving them sound advice on how not to be seen trying to exalt themselves, which leaves no room for others to show them honor. But he's hinting at something more radical. If you exalt yourself, then others will see you. But if others give you honor, will you not also be seen and honored? Will you not also rise in the sight of men? Doesn't that mean it would be best if no one gave you honor at all? In fact, that's exactly what Jesus says next. When you give a banquet or dinner, he says, do not invite your friends, your brothers or sisters, your relatives, your rich neighbors. If you do, they might invite you back, and you will be repaid. Now that stuck with me when I read it, because it almost seems like Jesus is saying that we should be afraid of people paying us back for kindness. It almost seems like he's saying we should go out of our way to avoid being repaid kindness. See, he goes on, he says, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, invite the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. Now, after this, Jesus tells them a parable about a man who threw a party and invited all the important people in his life, but they all found excuses to decline the invitation. Why would they do that? Well, they did it so they wouldn't have to repay it. Right? Nobody shows up to this party. They figure if I can just come up with an excuse not to go, then I break the cycle. I won't have to throw a party for him, and then they won't have to throw a party for me. It's all a mess. I don't want to do it. I'm going to stay home. So nobody shows up to the party, and the host is so upset that he goes out and he invites all the poor, the crippled, the blind, and he is, just like Jesus said, he brought in people off the streets to receive kindness. Because those who were worried about reciprocating missed the point. Just completely missed the point. Now it's very clear. We should go out of our way to avoid being paid back. Go out of our way to show kindness to those who absolutely can never pay it back. This is a game changer. Right? All those lion's paw stories about kindness being returned because we deserve it, those are all just fantasy. Karma doesn't exist. And that's good news because I don't know about you, but I've received far more in this life than I'll ever be able to deserve. And there's far too much pain in this world to say that everyone who is hurting deserves what they got. Karma is a lie that we tell ourselves so that we can seek immediate rewards for doing the right thing and to not have to feel too bad about the poor. And by the way, all of that talk about being repaid at the resurrection, that's not for your glory. That's for God. John got to see a tiny glimpse of what heaven would be like, and he wrote it down for us in Revelation. And he described ordinary people like you and me, who had done good work in their lives, who had received the honor for their deeds, take those trophies in the form of golden crowns and lay them at the feet of Jesus. They laid the credit for everything they had ever done at the feet of Jesus. Because nothing we could ever do in this life or the next could even come close to repaying the kindness that we were shown in Jesus. And if we can't hope to repay him, how could we hold on to such petty expectations for ourselves? Kindness was never meant to be reciprocated. Every week we take a little piece of bread and a small cup of juice. And we use these things as a reminder. We use them to remind us that God was willing to give it all for us. That he showed us kindness that we would never be able to repay. Kindness that we would never even be able to come close to matching, even on others' behalf. Knowing how badly we would screw it up. Knowing that we would reject him over and over again. He still showed kindness. He still showed love by going to the cross for my sin and yours. God showed us great love by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners. That's Romans 5:8. While we were still sinners, with nothing to offer, nothing at all that could ever repay him, no amount of good works that could ever overcome the tremendous debt of guilt and sin and death, God showed us kindness. A kindness that is available to anyone who simply and honestly cries out to him for help in a broken world. And no matter how alone, no matter how ashamed, no matter how far gone, anyone can come to him. And that is the love that we remember. When we take this piece of bread, Jesus, he broke it in front of his students, his disciples, his followers, his friends. And he said, this bread, when I break it, it's a symbol. He says, this is my body broken for you. So whenever you eat this, remember me. So we do that together. Also, at the end of the meal that he was eating with his friends, he took a cup. He says, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Right? It's a promise. What I'm doing today, it's a promise to look forward to. Whenever you drink this, remember me. Jesus died for you and me and anyone who will call on his name. Anyone who will reach out to him can be saved, can be free, can have life. Anyone at all. Right? No matter how spiritually crippled, no matter how shamed, can be part of the King's family, can eat at the King's table for no other reason than kindness. Kindness for the sake of kindness. That's the why of it. For no other reason than itself. You already knew what kindness was. You already know how to show it. Now you know why. Let me pray with you today. Father, thank you for the kindness that you've shown us. And may we be a small, dim reflection of that kindness in the world around us. Not to curry favor or gain some sort of reward. Not to benefit others so that they can benefit us. But to show kindness to benefit others, full stop. May we show kindness for the sake of kindness. May we be so desperate to do what is right in your eyes as King David was, that we will do the uncomfortable, that we will pay the cost, that we will go out of our way, give up the convenience so that others will benefit. You have been the greatest benefit to us. May we be a small part of that to someone else. Thank you for everything that you've given us. In Jesus' name, amen. Have a great week, folks. God bless you.